Let's talk about color corrections now. Whenever I want to work in color correction in Premiere, I like to switch over to the color workspace. So up to Window, Workspaces, and over to Color. So color all happens here in the Lumetri color panel, and it gets far more complex than what I'm about to show you. But really sort of a great way to dive in is just here in the basic correction tab. Lumetri Color has these 6 tabs here, and you can open or collapse them just by clicking right on the names. And depending on your comfort level with some of this stuff, or if you want to dive in and explore it a little bit more deeply, you're more than welcome to. But I tend to make most of my corrections right here in basic correction. When I need to dive in and fiddle around more specifically, then I find myself in curves and color wheels and match. But color correction will probably get 90% of what you're interested in. And it's pretty straightforward. The first thing we encounter is the white balance tool. So if you need to re-white balance your footage, I don't really need to in this case. But what you would do is you would click on the eyedropper, and then you would click in your image somewhere that is supposed to be white, and it'll white balance your footage off of that. And so if Millie's fur is white, then that means that I needed to warm my clip slightly and give it a slight magenta tint so that this would be 100% natural white, no color information in there. I can sort of mess with that playfully if I want. If I say something else in the image that is not actually white is white, so maybe this brown chair leg, then you can see if that says, hey, that's supposed to be completely neutral, not necessarily white, but neutral, then we're going to have to make the image much more blue so that this arrives at a neutral color. Anyways, but the next thing down is temperature. You can warm the image, cool the image. You can kind of go nuts with it if you want. Tint is pretty self-explanatory. And then anytime you need to return a value here to 0, you can just double click on it and it returns to 0. And some of these sliders will actually go past the value that the slider will let you if you just click and drag on the number. So you can see the slider here stops me at -100, but I can click and drag and go further. Saturation is pretty straightforward. You can oversaturate or desaturate. And then these are all exposure controls here. Exposure is just general brightness, up or down. Contrast, I mean, these all sort of do what they say on the box, as it were. If you want to adjust the highlights, that's the bright part of the images, but not necessarily the whites. That's kind of nice, actually, pulling the highlights down. We get a little bit more detail on Millie's face. Shadows is a lot like the highlights. It's the dark part of the image, but not the black part of the image. So we can lift the shadows. And actually, this is a great example. You can see how the black patch of fur on Millie's back doesn't really change as we shift the shadows. It does a little, but it basically stays black. And then whites and blacks are just that exact. Like this controls like the brightest parts of the image that are white, and the blacks controls the blackest parts of the image that are black. So if I could try to lift the blacks, you can see it's that patch there. Now there's no other information there, and so it actually just kind of looks like a gray blob when I do that, but you get the idea. Or we can push the black tones even darker, and then the same with whites. Now we're just making a terrible looking image. You can really quickly undo all the changes that you've made, or unpreview all the changes you've made by unchecking the checkbox here for each section. So this was before the changes, this was after the changes. Never mind, the changes are all just terrible. And returning all those. Curves works on an input versus output basis, and so this is the shadows here, and this is the highlights here. And so if at the highlights, all the way to the highlights, if I turn them down here, then you can see the image is getting darker. And the shadows, if no input is coming in, no brightness level, then there's no brightness level coming out. But if I lift this, then you can see I'm raising the brightness level of the shadows. So a good spot to start with curves is just knowing that like this sort of grayed out line is the shadows. This is black. This is midtones. This is highlights, and then this is white. So if I want to lift the highlights, I would add a point and drag up. You can see the highlights getting brighter. And if I wanted to drop the shadows, I would add a point here and drag down. And so this S curve is, sort of a typical just boosting contrast. We could invert it, so we brighten the shadows and darken the highlights. And you can see we're dropping contrast on the image. Another common change is just to take the midtones and pull it down just a little. That adds a little bit of contrast by darkening the midtones, but leaving highlights where they are. And then you can do that for each color channel of the RGB. If you double click, you get rid of those points. And then all these curves are just more detailed. They're sort of mapped hue versus saturation, hue versus hue. You can take what's the color that we have here? I'll take the eyedropper and say this color here, it's that color. So I'm going to take this color and map it to a different color. That's gross, but you get the idea. Hue versus luma, you can select a hue and change its brightness. So let's do that with that green now. That's what that green was before I changed it, and we can make that darker. Anyways, luma versus sat is brightness versus saturation, and then saturation versus saturation. And then color wheels, let me turn this off because I am just butchering this image. Color wheels is pretty self-explanatory as well. You have, you can push your shadows in any sort of direction that you want, your midtones and highlights. And then this is brightness for each of those things. So if I wanted to turn down my midtones, I could pull this slider down. It's making the midtones get darker. If I wanted to blue up my shadows, I could pull this over to blue. This is like the super common, right? Like blue shadows and yellow highlights. This would be the color grading if Millie was starring in a Jason Bourne movie. I don't know what, the midtones can just go hot pink. Sure. Anyways, you can see that those adjustments that I've made are now here. The Lumetri color panel is applied as an effect to this clip, and I can uncheck the effects mark to toggle that effect on and off. If I wanted to get rid of it, I could just click on it and hit delete. If I wanted to apply that same effect to another clip, I could actually just right click on this, the name of the effect, select copy, come over to this clip. I'll bring my playhead also so we can see the change. And then right click in an empty space in the effect controls panel and select paste. There we go. Now I have copied that effect, which was a color change, onto another clip.